Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special show. My guest today is a prolific venture capital investor, Vinod Khosla, who perhaps needs no introduction. Founder and managing director at Khosla Ventures, he started way back after his studies in Carnegie Mellon as well as at Stanford University, inspired then by Andrew Grove of Intel. He went on to co-found Daisy Systems, a computer-aided design system for electrical engineers, as well as Sun Microsystems. Today, he's an entrepreneur, investor, and describes himself as a technology fan who, in fact, helps to mentor entrepreneurs, helping them build technology-based businesses. Thank you so much, Mr. Khosla, for taking time out and joining us today on ET Now. What an absolute pleasure and honor it is to have you on board. To begin with, let me start off by understanding your outlook on the Indian investment climate right now. Why do you think that it's a good time for founders to actually start companies, and how in India specifically do you think founders can really play the alpha here?
Well, it's a great time because, as Warren Buffett said, when others are fearful, one should be aggressive. We are in a down cycle, but I will tell you, euphoria is not a great time to invest. One of the big things, there's a lot of talent, which is the oil of startups coming from large companies. So large companies are hemorrhaging talent, they're doing layoffs. Those are the people you want to help build your startup. The other thing is, because not all your competitors are getting a lot of funding, if you have a good idea and a good team, you have a huge advantage over a more liberal time where everybody can get funding. So I do think it's a very good time for investors. You can build better teams, cheaper, faster, easier, with better talent.
Oh, yes, indeed. And I wanted to speak about AI investments as well, because that is a space that you have had a definite first mover advantage. You said that at the time when you invested in ChatGPT and OpenAI, it was described as a very crazy notion. So now, what would be your opinion on AI investment in India?
Well, AI is the new phenomenon. 6 months ago, people didn't quite know how big a phenomena, maybe 9 months ago, how big a phenomena ChatGPT was. It grew so much faster to 100 million users than TikTok. So it has created a lot of euphoria, and hence I would say a little bit of caution. But the good thing is we invested in OpenAI 4 or 5 years ago, because we realized how impactful AI would be when developed. You couldn't predict the timing. You couldn't say it'll be here, this capability will be here in 4 years. But you could definitely say it's a very, very important trend. 10 years ago, I wrote about how AI can actually do the function of a lot of doctors or a lot of teachers. So a lot of things AI can do: content generation, music, all those things. So it's a very broad area of impact. Think of it more like when the iPhone platform came, and suddenly all these apps, from Uber to Airbnb to Ola Cab to pick your favorites, all became possible. Well, AI is the same kind of platform, only 10 or 100 times larger in my view. Many more things get enabled, and that's why it's such a promising area. Having said that, there's a hard part to it. What I've noticed over the last 6 months is a lot of startups do very niche things, add one little capability, and the next release of a large platform like GPT-4 or Google's effort obsoletes that feature because it's now built in. So it is tricky, and you want the right help and advice in picking what to go after. What will be a sustainable advantage and what won't be? is a very tricky question. Uh, but the opportunity is so large, and frankly, because it's so easy to get into it, it's open to a lot more people to do startups.
Well, it certainly is a very tricky environment right now, Mr. Khosla, when it comes to the startup landscape. There is a lot of uncertainty. There's global recessionary fears. We've been seeing pink slips being doled out by the dozen, to put it very mildly. But you had gone on record to say that you need to follow ace investor Warren Buffett's mantra that you should be fearful when others are greedy. In light of that, what do you think startups need to do in terms of their focus on profitability? What do you think will separate the men from the boys?
Well, my view is India is particularly good at what's the right term, jugaad innovation, like really surviving in bad times is a strength, particularly of the Indian entrepreneur. And I think frugal startups make for better startups in the long term because you take more time testing your ideas. If you raise a lot of money, then you're likely in execution mode and you fail to spend enough time saying, am I building the right thing? What will work? Is my assumptions about customer acquisition right? Those kinds of questions. And I think a frugal time makes you focus on the key risks a lot more. And that results in better startups. So I do think it's a good time. Also keep in mind when funding is less available for your competitors too. And you're not paying Google and Facebook a lot of money to advertise your startup because your competitors aren't doing it and things become more capital efficient. So I think it's a particularly good time.
And you've also gone ahead and said that it's a great time for VC investing. What's driving that optimism?
I would say the following. First, the euphoria around late stage investing has gone away. And that's good for VC investing. The valuations are more reasonable. But there's something more fundamental going on here. The war in Ukraine and the COVID crisis really caused a very large change in the planet. Everybody's focused on getting out of China and not be solely dependent on China for supply chains, whether it's for steel production or manufacturing iPhones. And everybody's focused on not being dependent on, at least in the West, on Russian gas. And Europe is making a strong energy transition. Those two phenomena probably create a 20-year cycle of creating alternatives that can only be done cost effectively with real technology innovation. And I think those areas will be very promising areas to invest in. Those two areas, which are very unfortunate crisis, but it behooves us to make the best of the crisis that happened and take advantage of it to build a better planet. That and the AI phenomena, which we've talked about, creates a real engine for innovation and hence for venture capital.
Well, I like that you called it the jugaad innovation. I want to also understand from your outlook as to how you think entrepreneurs should think when it comes to really stopping, when it comes to cutting the losses. Have you yourself done that?
Just because you failed once at an effort, it could have failed because the market isn't there and it's not a good market. But more often than not, you did it the wrong way, but your market instincts are still right. If you believe in that and you have or can get funding or survive on scarce funding, again, the jugaad innovation factor, I would say keep trying, just try it differently. So the key to good entrepreneurship is how fast you iterate, you zigzag left or right, how much you change your plan, how you evolve your plan to the reality in the marketplace. This is why lower cost innovation has a higher probability of success. And when you get a lot of money, you're more likely to fail, in my view. You test a lot of assumptions. But the key idea is if you keep testing your ideas and keep improving them and changing what is not working, if the fundamental idea in the market is right, then you'll get there if you have enough time. I sometimes tell entrepreneurs, stay alive long enough, survive long enough to thrive.
You know, and Mr. Khosla, we can't deny the fact that there have been revolutionary technologies in India, in particular for public goods, such as UPI or even ONDC. Do you think that the ingredients for explosion of digital transformation are in place in India?
I think the combination of what is called the India stack, UPI is a part of the India stack, but digital ID, Aadhaar, UPI just makes startups so much easier to do in these areas. Combine that with the power of AI, and even a low-income household could have a wealth advisor on how to manage their finances. And they need it more than sort of Mukesh Ambani does.
And if we were to get to the crux of it, a large population, in fact, the true India is really known by Bharat, which is in rural or semi-urban areas. Do you think that Indian startups should really focus on providing solutions for the problems that are faced by the people in Bharat? Could this really help in really encashing our demographic dividend?
Look, areas like rural areas often get ignored. There are very large markets because there's a large number of people, not as much wealth, but the most impactful startups, especially for those founders who are trying to have a large impact on Bharat, they apply to a lot of rural areas. So if you have an AI tutor, which we're doing not for profit, it'll benefit the rural areas the most, where good quality teaching is harder to get. One of my favorite projects in India is another nonprofit effort called 10bedicu.org. What 10-bed ICU came out of the COVID crisis and the realization in remote parts of India, ICU beds are not available. And we've now led by a guy called Sirikant Nadamuni, who, by the way, was the CTO of the Aadhaar effort under Nandan Nilekani, has started the 10-bed ICU effort. And we have over 200 ICUs set up in remote districts. There's only 700 districts in India. We already have ICUs set up in 700 remote parts of these districts, 200 of these districts in remote parts. So we just did the inauguration with the Chief Minister of Assam recently, just did an inauguration with the Chief Minister of Nagaland recently, and same in Karnataka in the remoter parts. So these are remote ICU beds with the expertise being remote, being in a metropolitan center like in Manipur or something, in a regional hospital, but the ICU bed itself is in a remote area. That kind of innovation is very exciting to me.
And I want to understand from you, from an entrepreneur standpoint, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that you've observed that founders really make at early stages of their startup, and what do you think can be done to avoid it?
Look, there's many ways to do a startup. There's not only one. And so I wouldn't call them mistakes, but here's what I would say. If you build a stronger team, you'll build a bigger startup in the long term. You'll have to make the investment early. It's very hard to hire that talent later. It has to be in the core gene pool of the company. And so it's pretty important to build very strong teams. I don't see as much of a focus on that in India compared to, say, Silicon Valley. So it's pretty important to build the right teams. Investors also tend to take a shorter term approach to revenue as opposed to saying what is truly innovative and disruptive and a big technical advantage. So some factors are less prevalent in Indian investors and in startups. And I hope to see a wider range of startups in India.
Now, failure is often seen as an inevitable part, of course, of the startup journey. But how do you think founders can really embrace failure, learn from it, improve their chances of success?
I would say to people, what looking good isn't what's important. Learning fast, admitting your mistakes early as quickly as possible, and fixing them is much more important than looking good and not admitting your mistakes. Part of that is a culture you set up. So there's a woman called Margaret Heffron, has a great set of books and a TED Talk called Dare to Disagree. So good entrepreneurs will set up culture in the company where even a junior engineer can challenge the CEO with questions. And I think in that kind of a culture, you will discover problems early, you will fix them earlier, and you'll build better companies, faster companies. And I think that culture is somewhat missing in India because there's a more hierarchical nature to those startups instead of anybody being able to challenge anybody. So that's my one piece of advice to entrepreneurs. Don't focus on the investors, focus on your employees and learning from them. Because they're in the trenches every day doing all those things. They probably have lots of good ideas that you can leverage in your startup.
Oh, absolutely. Well said. Now, you do have the likes of Sequoia that have actually exited India and China. They said that it's hard to oversee portfolio companies across oceans. Do you think VC investing is set to return to the Don Valentine model of funding companies within a small geographic boundary?
I think, look, there's two types of activities in venture. One is investing. And to me, that you can do remotely, but that's all you're doing. You're investing and letting somebody else build the company. The other is to be a venture assistant, really help build a company. So investing is a very different activity for VCs than building companies or helping entrepreneurs build companies. This is why I say I've never been in the investing business. I'm just a venture assistant to entrepreneurs, trying to be their assistant as they try and build companies. That model requires much more interaction. Now, fortunately, some of it can be done now remotely also. But those are very different activities, and not enough entrepreneurs realize the difference between people who are just investing to get a rate of return and people who are trying to help you build a company and think of the long-term, more ambitious vision of what you're trying to do. So those are very different, and I do urge entrepreneurs to think about it hard when deciding which investors to pick as their investment partner.
And I have to ask, because there's that highly anticipated battle, if you will, between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, Twitter versus Threads. Are you on Threads, and how do you see this battle really playing out?
I have joined Threads. They've gotten a lot of subscription, and that is a real battle. But the task ahead for Threads is to get a lot more usage. And, Mark Zuckerberg knows social just about as well as anybody else on the planet. So I'm sure he's worrying about how to get more usage, more interaction, and it'll be an interesting battle. So I do think it's a large battle. I think the world will be better off. If there's both Threads and Twitter, but we'll see.
Well, yes, indeed. We'll have to see how things pan out on that front. But wanted to understand from you, do you chase the idea or the entrepreneur? Do you think it's critical to have a mix of both, or would you be betting more or tilting more towards one side?
Well, between those two, the entrepreneur is more important. You have to have a great entrepreneur, and you have to have large, interesting markets and MVP small starting point. Because you can't pursue a large idea from day one, but you can have a large idea vision from day one and pursue a narrow path. So an entrepreneur who understands that is more important than being in the right market, but both are important. I also give the following advice to entrepreneurs. Think about it as starting a company that's large impact is like climbing Mount Everest. Nobody went to the top of Mount Everest in one go. You go to base camp, then you go to camp 1, then you go to camp 2, camp 3. But you're trying to get to the top of Mount Everest and you think about it day one. You can get to another peak at the same level or higher than base camp that doesn't lead to the peak of Everest. So it's very important to even pick suboptimal targets in revenue or other ways early on, so it leads to a path in the top of Mount Everest. There's many other peaks around base camp that are higher than 14,000 feet. And if you go there, you'll be stranded in the local maxima at a dead end. You'll not get to Mount Everest. So it's clever, but that's what you rely on a good entrepreneur to do and think about, and build the journey to building a large company from day one, build the right team from day one that helps you get to the top of Mount Everest. Because if you start off without the right help, you're not going to get there. And if you have the wrong investors and chase revenue, you might end up mountain tides, not as ambitious as Mount Everest.
That is true. And given the fact that you've gone on record to say you need to have the optimism to go after the outliers, tell us, where is the next outlier then?
Look, when we invested in OpenAI 4 or 5 years ago, it was a very controversial kind of area. What would AI capability be in 4 or 5 years? How large an impact could it have? Would Google own the market? There was lots of risk. But that's where you have to make intelligent guesses and forecast the future. I mentioned we are doing public transit earlier. It'd be such a good idea for India. This kind of public transit is 10 times cheaper than light rail and much more responsive and better in every way. So, but when I talk to most people, they wouldn't say public transit is something startups can do. But we've already won a few contracts, including in San Jose, to build a public transit system. Take Impossible Foods. Plant proteins is a massive area and could be innovated in India, but isn't generally being done. So that's another example. So lots and lots of areas, lots and lots of opportunity. Just takes great entrepreneurs to imagine the possible and then try and make it happen and not be afraid of failure. People worry too much about failure, not enough about trying something ambitious that they'll be proud of the rest of their lives.
And finally, Mr. Khosla, you have Marshall Goldsmith in his book of What Got You Here Won't Get You There, actually saying that people who believe they can succeed see opportunities where others see threats. And to a great extent, that of course holds true for you, because you have said that optimism is one of the key skills in order to succeed as a venture capitalist. Tell us how it really played a role in your great success as a prolific venture capitalist.
And before I go, I would say the following. You have to be optimistic, but you have to be willing to fail. I often say my willingness to fail lets me try things that cause me to sometimes succeed. Yeah, I'd rather try and fail than fail to try, which is what most people do.